This program is brought to you by Emory University.
In studying early baseball, it's important to learn about the Knickerbocker Baseball Club of New York City. The Knickerbockers were a group of young men from New York. They were clerks, storekeepers, brokers, firemen, who were accustomed to playing the game of baseball for recreation. The Knickerbockers can't be called the first baseball club, and they certainly weren't the best. Records show they lost one game by a score of 23-1. There were many other similar athletic clubs in existence at the time, and all of them had been playing a New York game since at least the early 1800s. In New England, meanwhile, young men played a version of baseball called the Massachusetts game. But in September of 1845, the Knickerbockers wrote down a set of rules for playing baseball. They may not have been the first team to play baseball, but they were the first to stipulate in writing how to play it. At least some of the rules seem to have been their own invention. These Knickerbocker rules have been preserved. You can study them among our course documents. They're quite short. Some of them will seem vague. For example, the distance between bases is given in paces, not measured feet. But in them you'll see, in essence, all the important features of the modern game. The Knickerbocker rules are an important historic document for baseball. In them you can find some of the game's most basic elements, as well as a number of its mysterious and endearing quirks. 3 strikes and you're out was the law of the land from the very beginning in most bat and ball games. But for some reason the Knickerbockers stipulated in Rule 11 that a batter who swung 3 times and missed would be permitted to reach base safely if the 3rd strike were dropped by the catcher. Why gross ineptitude on the part of the batter should be forgiven, or at least given a temporary reprieve, is not clear, though the rule seems to reflect a slight bias on the part of Cartwright to see the game from the point of view of the hitter. The Knickerbockers may even have been responsible, though this isn't certain, for setting the distance between bases at 90 feet. When you think about it, it's an odd dimension to choose. Why not an even 100 feet? But some people say that in picking 90 feet, humans came as close to perfection as anything else they ever did. Think about it. If it were 10 feet less between home and first, no runner could ever be thrown out on a ground ball in the infield. If it were 10 feet more, even the fastest runner would never make it. Perhaps Cartwright's influence can be seen also in the so-called balk rule. That's Knickerbocker Rule 19. In effect, the balk rule bars pitchers from deceiving the batter with a fake throw to the plate. It'd be nice to have been a fly on the wall during the Knickerbockers' deliberations over the club rules. Deceptions of one sort or another have always been part of the game of baseball. Runners can pretend to steal a base, fielders can pretend to catch a fly ball, batters can pretend to bunt. Then why shouldn't pitchers be permitted to pretend to throw? The rule makes no sense, either from the point of view of the safety of the players or the fairness of the competition. Here's what former American League umpire Ron Luciano, famous during his career for his flamboyant style, said of baseball's Rule 8.05. "I never called a balk in my life. I didn't understand the rule." The rule may be incomprehensible even to a professional umpire. You try reading it yourself, see if you get it. But it's nevertheless there. At bottom, baseball is a deeply conservative game, a world where things are done a certain way just because that's the way they've always been done. That's kind of why I like it. The Knickerbocker concept of baseball also owed something to the romantic and cooperative ideals of English sportsmanship. Knickerbockers eliminated the old practice of putting runners out by soaking or plunking them. Think about dodgeball, for example. And Cartwright also stipulated that the ball was to be pitched, not thrown, for the bat. That's a curious distinction. Apparently this meant that the pitcher was expected to toss the ball, like that, underhand, much the same way a batting coach will gently offer balls to players in practice, or, as you can see depicted in some of the early images of children playing games with bat and ball. That seems to be the style. Cartwright seems to have imagined a passive role for the pitcher, who was obliged to offer the ball to the batter when and where he called for it. Cartwright's belief that the pitcher ought to help the batter put the ball in play might have stood a better chance of survival if he had written other rules that made the game more like t-ball or fungo. Perhaps Cartwright had in mind a game like coach pitch baseball, played by elementary school children. In all these variations of baseball, serious throwing, that's to say hard overhand throwing, is discouraged or actually eliminated. The person on the mound is simply one more position player, and the batter himself assumes sole responsibility for putting the ball in play. Probably Cartwright's cooperative fantasy was doomed from the start. I mean, what was he thinking? Even in a kinder, gentler world than our own, and 19th century America surely wasn't that, you could hardly expect young men to toss balls meekly to a succession of batters who were intent on hammering them right back. The Knickerbockers, perhaps unwittingly, had installed at the center of baseball a balanced, it's almost a ritual, competition between pitcher and batter. One man holds a missile, the other a club. This game stages a classic agon, one man holding a missile, the other a club. It was inevitable that pitchers would soon try, still technically within the rules, to throw balls that batters couldn't hit. That's exactly what happened during the years after the Knickerbocker or New York game spread throughout America. Pitchers began to interpret pitching to mean underhand throwing, and they soon made full use of shoulder, arm, and wrist when they threw the ball, as long as they released the ball below the waist. The result was a generation of pitchers in the late 19th century who threw with modern sidearm or submarine deliveries. But both of these deliveries are capable of velocities as high as 90 miles an hour. And often, because of the sidearm delivery, they had the late down-and-away break of a modern-day slider. For men who went to bat expecting, according to the old Knickerbocker rules, something like batting practice, these speeding, diving balls must have been all but unhittable. The historical record of rule changes indirectly tells the story. During the second half of the 19th century, the rules of the game were altered almost annually in favor of batters in an attempt to establish a competitive balance between pitching and hitting. You can see these changes taking place if you check out the chronology of rule changes. First 8 balls, then 7 balls, then 6, then 5 were required for a batter to obtain a walk. Each time the pitcher's advantage was lessened a little bit. By the end of the century, pitchers were throwing overhand with much the same velocity as they throw now, and the modern game of baseball was in effect fully established.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.